Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 AM and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I'm Egghead. No, I'm Bill London. I host and co-host the Wake Up Call, heard on KPNW 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Fridays. And I'm also the news director here. And by the way, we stream at kpnw.com. And the final and, until more ands come, this is brought to you by none other than Rick Dancer, because he believes in local journalism and in the stories that other people aren't telling. So we're going to start off kind of with this. So after last week's newscast was posted on YouTube, I was taking a look at it and a number of the comments. And a number of people were commenting, and not too favorably, on Oregon calling itself a sanctuary promise state, and how Oregon's top politicians are saying the state of Oregon is going to protect illegal aliens as much as it can, and that the state would spend taxpayer dollars to fund legal services to try and get illegals into the pipeline to potential leadership and to try and figure out ways to subvert immigration's customs enforcement. Why? Well, because illegals are being deported by President Trump. And Oregon is one of those, not just a sanctuary city, but an entire sanctuary state. And it led to a bunch of people commenting along the lines of, when did I vote for this? Did I get a chance to vote for this? I don't remember voting for this. Well, kind of the short answer to this is you actually did in Oregon. You voted for it when you voted for a number of legislative candidates. Now, I'm going to get more into it because I'm going to update last week's story about the state and its fight against ICE and deportations. So Governor Tina Kotek over the weekend released a video, and she reiterated that she is going to uphold Oregon's sanctuary promise laws that were passed by lawmakers back in the 1980s. But there's a little more to it than that. Now, the law, let me just describe it, bars police from arresting people who aren't U.S. citizens if their only offense is being in the U.S. illegally. Now, that's the way it was written in the 80s. The law prohibits, because it's been changed, the law prohibits public agencies or workers from collaborating with the federal government to enforce immigration laws. Now, Governor Kotek said about illegal aliens in this video, our immigrant communities are Oregon communities. And she said that illegal aliens are Oregonians. And she's repeated that a number of times, which kind of leads to a question. Is anyone who wanders into the state an Oregonian? I mean, if you visit a relative for a month or two, are you an Oregonian? If you don't pay taxes here, are you an Oregonian? If you can't say that you're a citizen of the U.S., exactly how can you be an Oregonian? It kind of tortures normal English. Anyway, now, as to Oregon becoming a sanctuary state, the move towards this started back in 1979. The first bill to try and codify it was introduced in the Oregon legislature in 1983. It failed. That was back in a time when Oregon only had a legislative session every 2 years, which, God, I wish we'd go back to. So they brought it up again in 1985. It failed again. And it failed the first two times because law enforcement was dead set against it. Finally, it passed in 1987. At the time, all it did was say that police couldn't arrest anybody for simply the crime of being here in the country illegally. But once Oregon became fully in the hands of the Democrats in the 2000s, well, there were more and more and more stipulations that were added, the last being in 2021. That's when the latest additions essentially made it a crime for any public employee at any level, city, state, county, or otherwise, to assist ICE in any matter whatsoever, including, say, a police officer who gives a tip to ICE that says, hey, there's an armed robber in county lockup, cell 112, who's here in the country illegally. They can't do that. The law allows for the tip giver and whatever government entity they work for to face civil charges, including a lawsuit, and to be investigated by the Department of Justice here in Oregon. It's also pretty much universal knowledge that even if it isn't written as part of the law, that if you work for the state and you provide any assistance to ICE, you will be summarily fired. Now, like I said, the last changes to Oregon sanctuary laws were passed in 2021. Well, here's what we've got coming up in this current Oregon legislative session. So, another plan is that the Oregon legislature has Senate Bill 599. It would prohibit any landlords from asking about a person's immigration status, and if they know, disclosing it to anyone, in particular ICE. Then you have Senate Bill 703. It would direct the Department of Human Services to provide taxpayer-funded grants to nonprofits to help illegal aliens try and obtain legal status and potentially provide legal help if they get busted by ICE. Eugene Democratic Representative and House Speaker Julie Fahey said, "We will defend every Oregonian's constitutional rights and basic freedoms." Then you have another plan to help spend taxpayer money on illegal aliens, and it's coming at it from a different angle. Namely, well, take taxpayer money and give them free food. Monday, Oregon Food Bank President Andrea Williams, during a legislative committee, testified about food insecurity in Oregon, and she says it's rising. Now, in case you don't remember, the Oregon Food Bank is the same group that on Thanksgiving 2 years ago tweeted, quote, "On this day and every day, we recommit ourselves to challenging and disrupting colonial narratives such as the myth of the so-called Thanksgiving feast. We encourage folks," spelled F-O-L-X, "to use this day as a teachable moment for yourself, your communities, and loved ones." And it linked to an article they wanted you to read saying that, and the headline of, "Thanksgiving should be a day of mourning." Okay, now back to the hunger issue and Oregon Food Bank, Andrea Williams. So she said and testified that in Oregon, quote, 1 in 8 people experience hunger. 1 in 6 kids don't have enough to eat. It's actually the worst rate of hunger and food insecurity since the Great Depression. Now comes the telling part. Williams and other advocacy groups are behind a bill in Salem to create a state-based program to feed those ineligible for SNAP benefits. And during her testimony, she said, "We want to create a state-based program because there's about," and I'll quote her here again, 61,000 Oregonians who are excluded from utilizing the federal program. Then she said, finally, quote, "These are mostly immigrant and refugee families, including legal permanent residents, asylum seekers, and undocumented folks who can't apply for federal SNAP." So this story came out today, and it was reported in Willamette Week, but they were basing their reporting on a project that was done by the Oregon Journalism Project. And it had to do with the governor's executive order, where she ordered ODOT to do what are called project labor agreements. And project labor agreements essentially mean that these jobs could only be done by union outfits and union workers. And the governor claimed it would lower costs and ensure that projects are adequately resourced. Now, I'm going to kind of just go through a skeleton of what the story in the Willamette Week and the work done by the Oregon Journalism Project found out. So first off, there have been thousands of PLAs around the country. And one of the big conclusions was that it increased the cost of these projects between 10 and 20%. And by the way, those increases are paid by taxpayers, in this case, Oregon. What it also found out and was discovered that 89% of ODOT's jobs are being done by small union outfits. Part of the reason for that is because there are so few union contractors in Oregon that do road work, bridge projects, and the like. Now, here's the kicker. The government, or the governor, said in December when she made the executive order again that it would lower costs and that the projects would be adequately resourced. What she didn't say was that ODOT did its own study and survey in 2022. And what did it show? It would increase costs, it would reduce bids, and that essentially it would also reduce jobs. Now, non-union contracting groups, small firms, mom and pops, these other contractors that do some of this work, they went to court. They sued the state over some pilot programs that ODOT was considering doing. Well, in April of last year, the court basically said, yeah, this is totally illegal and that it is prejudicial against non-union shops. But of course, the governor is sticking by it. Now, that case is supposed to go in front of the Supreme Court, but the governor got in front of it by doing the executive order in December. Now, you might be asking, well, why would the governor do that when ODOT is going in front of the legislature and asking for billions of dollars to fund projects here in the state of Oregon this legislative session? The price tag at this point that we're looking at in this 2-year period is somewhere between $5 and $6 billion for the next 2 years. Why would she be doing this? Well, let's see. How about the fact that when Governor Tina Kotek in 2022 ran for governor, labor unions donated $1.2 million to her campaign. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of union workers who volunteered to knock on doors, put door hangers up, make phone calls to drum up support, and other work that they did for free. So, in other words, yeah, we're going to pay you off. And what they're going to do on the other hand as well is all of these other non-union workers are going to find themselves essentially not getting work. And the governor says, well, this is going to ensure our projects are adequately resourced. How can they do that when there are so few union contractors? There was one project that was supposed to happen in Deschutes County that was going to be one of these PLA pilot projects. What they discovered was there were no union contractors east of the Cascades, and that all the work was going to have to be brought in from the Willamette Valley and Portland area. Once again, of course, supporting Portland and Portland's economy at the cost of, well, workers in Deschutes County or anywhere in eastern Oregon. So the article came out today in the Willamette Week. I suggest you go there and read it because they go into great detail as to what ODOT had already found out, which was this is going to cost even more money at a time when ODOT is saying we're broke and we can't even go out and sand roads during ice storms. As a matter of fact, the Republicans, or a couple of Republican representatives, sent out a press release today saying that the governor's own agency confirmed what we already knew. Her order will increase costs on an agency that's struggling. And according to Representative Virgil Osborne, he said when the costs hit them, they're going to come to the legislature and ask for more funding. And he continued, the governor's decision-making benefits our urban supporters and harms rural Oregonians. Rural counties that already experienced PLAs set the tone for the future to come. Representative Ed Deal said the governor's executive order hurts small businesses, especially startup businesses, and puts them at a distinct disadvantage bidding for construction work. I can tell you this is not over. And keep in mind that the Oregon legislature, which is already essentially run by Democrats, they have a supermajority in both the Senate and the House, 2 years ago had a bill that would require PLAs for ODOT projects, and even the Democrats at that time voted it down because it was going to be too expensive and cost jobs. So, Oregon needs to build about 29,500 homes each year to emerge from a housing shortage that essentially has been years in the making. Now, that is according to the state economist, and he testified in front of a committee at the Capitol about this. The state's Office of Economic Analysis released its first annual Housing Needs Analysis report with home building targets for the state and individual cities to meet. Now, all of this is part of a law that was passed in 2023 by the legislature that sought to give the state more power to set housing goals and hold cities accountable to reach their goals. Admittedly, the 29,500 total is way lower than Governor Tina Kotek's goal of building 36,000 homes a year, but it's still well above construction in recent years. Now, the governor, by the way, at her behest, that 2023 law was passed. But here's some interesting factoids. Builders filed just more than 20,000 residential permits in 2022, less than 18,000 in 2023, and barely more than 13,000 at the end of 2024. Lagging construction is coming as more Oregonians are struggling to find affordable homes to buy or rent. Now, the state's chief economist, Carl Riccadonna, said housing affordability actually comes down to three conditions: the actual home or rent price, then there's household income, and finally interest rates. Riccadonna said and testified, and I'm going to quote him, housing affordability as poor as it's been, going all the way back to the 1980s when we had double-digit mortgage rates. And there's a lot to unpack with Riccadonna and his testimony. And I'm going to kind of sum up some of the high points. He said, first, there's been years of underproduction after building permits peaked at 31,000 homes back in 2025 and then declined dramatically even more, though the population grew here by 400,000 people. Then he said, you've got the issue of trying to rehouse the homeless, where it's expected Oregon's going to need another 45,637 homes for people experiencing homelessness within the next 20 years. That's on top of another 242,000 plus homes for newcomers coming to the state that's going to be needed in the same time period. Then you combine that with homes that have been lost to short-term rentals and vacation homes, and you also have smaller households where kids grow up, they move out, they need a place to live. Then you have baby boomers living alone or with a single partner. Okay, and again, because of all that, you need another 139,100 homes to account for that aspect. There's one thing that he didn't state, and I have heard this from many building contractors, and that is the cost, the expense, and the red tape to get permits within cities, Portland being a prime example, to build anything. And it drives the cost up to the point where they can't afford to build them to make any kind of profit. And in some cases, they're working on such low margins, it doesn't even make it worth it for them. That's another part of the reason why starts in Oregon are so bloody low. He didn't have that as a part of the report, but I'm passing it along to you from their perspective. Okay, so we're number last, or we're 49. In the latest confirmation that extended pandemic era school closures took a huge toll on a generation of young Oregonians, we have this. New test results released on Tuesday show the state's middle and elementary schools still lag far behind the rest of the nation in reading and math. Now, pre-pandemic, at best, Oregon students were somewhere around, but usually below, national averages on the National Assessment of Education Progress, the only standardized achievement test given to a representative sample of students in almost all states. Now, there's a few states that opt out of it. Post-pandemic data, including the 2024 test scores released Tuesday, show a different story. We're not even anywhere near average. Oregon fourth graders who were tested in 2024 ranked second worst in the nation in math and tied with 10 other states for the third worst in reading. Eighth graders tested in the same period, who are now halfway through their first year of high school, performed far below the national average in math and were at best middle of the pack in reading. But students have been back to in-person learning since the fall of 2021, and Oregon's 197 school districts shared more than $1 billion in federal pandemic aid, like other states, to help their students readjust and recover academically. But, as we've reported here before, according to the state's Oregon Department of Education, most of that money was spent on just about everything and every pet project except stuff that actually was supposed to go to students to help them recover academically. They went for pet projects. Oh, we're going to build stuff. Oh, we're going to increase the size of our administration because, you need more administrators. You always need more administrators. And to spend money trying to pay off the public employees' retirement system. Well, that money's gone, and the state's children still haven't caught up. Struggling fourth grade readers were further behind in 2024 than previous fourth graders now in seventh grade were in 2022. The results show that Oregon's current fifth graders posted bottom-of-the-barrel math scores that were measurably worse than those in 45 other states, better than only New Mexico. Now, remember I said there's a few states that opt out of this, and were statistically unchanged the last time their age group was tested back in 2022. A full third of Oregon's then fourth graders who took the federal test scored below basic on the math section, which means that they couldn't even identify whole numbers on a number line, which is basically anything that's not a fraction or has a decimal point. And they couldn't locate lines in shapes of symmetry in shapes like triangles. Nationwide, only a quarter of students scored below basic, whereas in Oregon, most. So the Oregon legislature is going to be hearing a bill that would give union workers who go on strike unemployment checks. And the bill was submitted at the request of the AFL-CIO union in a year where we have seen teacher strikes at all sorts of different school districts throughout the state. We're currently in the middle of the largest healthcare strike in the state. And even here locally in the Eugene-Springfield area, we've had two major strikes, one at the Franz Bakery and another at Bigfoot Beverages. So, needless to say, they want Oregonians to pay. Now, employers in Oregon pay quarterly in taxes to fund unemployment insurance. And as you would expect, the concept's drawing fire from the Oregon Business and Industry Association. They say, quote, extending those benefits to people who choose not to work for whatever reason is going to be significant and costly. Well, this is already going long, but I figured I would put this in here and we'll kind of end with this. So the legislature, of course, in session, and there's two bills in motion right now to address one of the most visible aspects of homelessness. You have House Bill 2696 that has to do with homeless camps on public property and what happens to the stuff when they move. Now, most of it, in a lot of jurisdictions, ends up getting picked up, and even the garbage is stored for 30 days until somebody comes and picks it up. The other bill is related to the environmental effects. Now, State Representative John Lively from Springfield sponsored House Bill 2696 that's intended to create a statewide standard for unsanctioned camp removals. It would require removal crews to give homeless people 72 hours notice before they're told to move, posted in English and Spanish, and that they would have to hold everything, garbage, all of it, for at least 30 days until somebody either came and picked it up or just didn't. Homeless people and outreach workers who serve them report that items are lost or thrown away during encampment sweeps. The other bill, Senate Bill 359, deals with the environmental impact of homeless camps. Now, this was actually brought to the legislature by Willamette Riverkeepers, and as we reported, I believe it was last year, they were talking about drug needles, human waste, and just garbage that gets washed down the Willamette River when the river gets high, and that it's causing a major environmental hazard. The bill would allow anyone to submit a complaint to the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality if waste from a camp is discharged into state waters, prioritizing drinking water resources. If there's an environmental risk, the people at the camp would have to be removed and the site would have to be cleaned. How much is that going to cost? It's anybody's guess. I can tell you that in one case alone in Eugene, and it has to do with a park, it's called the Washington Jefferson Street Park. And it's not that very big, just about 2 to 3 acres. It turned into a gigantic homeless camp during the pandemic. When it was finally everybody told to leave, it cost the city close to $2 million to clean it up and repair the damage. That's for one city park. All right, well, there's your news. As Rick likes to call it, your crazy Oregon news. Yeah, it is pretty insane. It's been brought to you by Rick because Rick believes there are stories out there you don't hear about, and you should. Thanks, Rick. All right, Rick, get real.